Well, as folks start to tune in, I just want to welcome everyone to Manny's Super Civic Cyber Conversations. I'm Manny Acutiel. I run a small business in San Francisco that's all about engaging the public civically, and this is our way of continuing to do that work in this time of need. This is the fourth, I think, conversation of the day. We've had a range of topics and interviews and questions, and we're going to keep the pace going over this coming week. And today we are so honored and so lucky to have this incredible California statewide leader, our controller, Betty Yee, here to be in conversation. Hi, Betty.
Hi, Manny. Thank you.
How are you feeling right now? You're in the Sunset District, so
I
probably.
am. Yeah. No, I'm doing, I just finished a shift with my mother who requires home care. So I'm doing well. And I just, obviously every day we wake up and our hearts are going out to those who are, really affected severely by this pandemic. So, and I just have to say, we can't say enough. Thank you, thank you, thank you to all of our frontline healthcare personnel and professionals who are out there. I know we're going to be recruiting more to help with the cases.
Yeah, well, before we go any further, I just want to let folks know who are tuning in that if you have questions for Betty Yee, the controller of the state of California, on our finances, you can type them into the Q&A box. You don't have to wait. So if you have a question, just type it in. We'll get to Q&A in about 15, 20 minutes. Also, please raise your hand so we can see who's here. There's a little button that you can press called Raise Hand. So why don't you go ahead and raise your hand so I can see who's here and welcome you all to this call. Thank you all so much for joining. Oh, Nicole. Hi, Nicole. So Betty, first of all, I don't want this to be all, sad and stuff, but we're in a dark time right now, as it relates to the California of all finances, our state and our country. A couple weeks ago, you were at Manny's and you were talking about California's state finances, and it was a very different picture. Can you give us a sense of where we are right now in terms of the financial picture of our state?
Sure. So I will say we started out before this pandemic, as through our conversation, very, very strong financially, historic levels of reserves, and and like every other state, every other municipality, our sole focus is the health and safety of those in the state, and so we are drawing on those reserves. We are looking as part of the governor's emergency declaration to secure equipment, supplies, everything that can help our frontline health professionals really deal with the cases that are presenting themselves. And so this will be a push. This will be a push. Things will become tight. And it's no sugarcoating. We're going to monitor it every day, but we also, at the same time, provided relief to taxpayers. So we extended the deadline for income tax filings. That means we're not going to get that money in for 90 days from the usual deadline. So that will also, add to the pressures. But I will say this, we have this economy that's been resilient in the past. We have tools that we can resort to. Some of them are going to be ones that we haven't had to resort to in a very, very long time. But first and foremost has to be the health and safety of all Californians.
So how does the pushing back of the income tax money affect the planning process, and specifically your very important function of actually paying
the bills?
Yeah,
exactly.
Paying the bills. How does that affect that, and what's the plan in place for that?
Well, we are assessing our cash flow right now, and the tax revenues that normally come in beginning April 15th is really the basis for how the governor revises the budget in May for the legislature to adopt by and have in place by the end of June, because we're not going to get the majority of that personal income tax revenue, especially until July. That pushes it out to the next fiscal year, and so it will be tight. It may be that we're going to have to look at, deferring some payments. It may mean that we'll have to just look at how we can tighten our belts in different ways, but we are analyzing that as we speak.
And of course, it's not just the delay in income tax. Well, no, all the income tax stuff is based on 2018. So it's not going to affect,
2019, right.
It doesn't affect the revenues that come in from taxes that have been affected by coronavirus. You're probably gonna see that next year, right?
Absolutely. And we know that with what's happening with the economy, that we expect that next year tax revenues will be very, very depressed.
So I know that California's tax base and revenue is very unique and specific. And can you talk about how you predict the shutting down of the economy and sheltering in place for looks like between 1 and 2 months at this point might affect tax revenues in the coming year or two?
Absolutely. So you look at California's economy, and I think what we're seeing in terms of how many are not working or who have lost jobs or have been laid off are really from our service sector of the economy, certainly the restaurant industry, as you well know.
Hmm.
And so many of those are, I would say, really some of the lower paid workers in our
Yeah.
economy.
Yeah.
And because those businesses are not operating, restaurants, a lot of the retail and places that people would generally just take time to go to, where there's not going to be a lot of consumer spending. There will be consumer spending relative to just focusing on our health and safety. But so you look at what's happening to the economy. The vulnerable workers who are making, probably $15 an hour or less are those that are going to be probably unemployed.
Mhm.
There is some financial relief from both the state and the federal government for those workers. But the question is really, how long will the economy not be fully productive?
Yeah.
And that's really the unknown question. If we can get through this pandemic, and I have to say, the leadership here in San Francisco, Mayor Breed, certainly with Governor Newsom, with just the home isolation, has been, I think, it's being observed as being a potentially game changer. So hopefully we can get to the other side of this emergency much more quickly.
Um, Gosh, let's actually take a second and zoom in to what's going on in Sacramento. So,
Yeah.
you're one of the leaders in our state government. How have you? Are you've been watching all this obviously unfold. I'm sure you've been in the room for a lot of hard conversations. How do you feel our leadership is doing right now, and our state government is doing in its response to this? And yeah, if you could just tell us, maybe give us some information and some anecdotes about what it's been like being in the room during some of these conversations and these meetings about the future of the state and its finances.
Sure. Let me just maybe start with my own shop. So, most of state government employees who are providing essential critical functions are at work. We are, my office, the State Controller's office, I consider to be kind of a financial first responder, if you will. And so we, really want to keep payments going, payroll, and so much of many of the state workers are teleworking. We have that capability. And so I would say that normal operations is probably what people are still experiencing with most of state government. What we do anticipate, and let me back up. The leadership, I would say, of the state for, with Governor Newsom, and I would say with many of our local government leaders as well, has been stellar.
Mm.
When you look at what else is happening in other parts of the country, I think governors have really stepped up to play a
Yeah.
huge role in terms of the leadership. We unfortunately have gotten not the best of information coming out of Washington, and so when I look at, is the health and safety of Californians top of mind for our California leadership? Absolutely, no question. When I look at how we're planning for the economy. This is a balancing act because we want to provide Californians with relief. There's going to be more efficiency in terms of applying for unemployment. There's going to be federal relief in terms of extending unemployment and increasing the amounts. So we've got our state workforce all prepared to handle that workload. And so when you talk about the economy, again, it's going to be really based on how soon can we, really get through this pandemic and have this economy start getting to work again?
Yeah.
And for a lot of the businesses that are shut down, I hope it's not a long time to where we can see them just come back up again.
So let's talk about, and thank you for that. And it is when all this was started to go down, my first thought was, I'm so glad that Betty Yee is the controller, because you are so solid, you are so unflappable, you're just such a solid person. You're so good at the job. And so I was like, whew, at least we've got Betty Yee as the state controller. That is one thing I can sleep soundly at night about. Let's talk about unemployment. So I'm not really sure how it works. So do we know how many people in California are filing for unemployment roughly? I know it's probably been a huge increase. And then also, is that money coming from the federal government or the state government? And like how is the state planning on like getting all these people who are filing for unemployment the money that they need?
Sure. So it's from both the state and the federal government. So unemployment claims have been increasing exponentially. Just recent information I have for the week that ended March 21st, our Employment Development Department processed more than about 186,000 unemployment claims, and which was a huge increase over the prior week, where only about 58,000 claims were filed. So that was really, kind of at the beginning of the pandemic. So we expect that to continue to increase. And this is state unemployment. So what Governor Newsom did was to waive the normal 1 week waiting period before allowing Californians to be paid for their first week of unemployment. We then, under the federal economic support plan that's been passed, workers will be able to get another $600 weekly for 4 months. And so we should be getting about another 120 million in additional unemployment benefit funding. So that will extend the period from 26 to 39 weeks. And this is hopefully a time frame that where we can, within that time frame, we can hopefully get back on our feet.
And well, that's reassuring. Only one more question on this is like, how quickly do you think the folks who applied for unemployment will be able to actually see that money hit their accounts?
Well, with the state unemployment, I would say fairly quickly, because we waived that 1 week waiting period. For the federal unemployment, the additional money that's coming, the bill was just enacted last week, so the timing is still a little uncertain. But I would say that for anyone who wants to apply, do not call the Employment Development Department. Go online. The volumes are huge, and but we have all hands on deck in terms of getting these processed and money in people's pockets.
Has there just been like a huge influx of like, has the state government diverting human resources and people to work at the EDD, or are there rules against doing that?
Actually, what we are doing, every department is identifying where we have resources that could be directed to our most critical needs. And so when we look at unemployment, getting assistance and money into people's pockets, we're going to be redirecting all the resources to where that can be as efficient as possible.
Got it. Okay. Let's go now to, what was I going to go to next? There's so many things I wanted to ask you about. There was unemployment. Oh, $1,200. What do you think about the federal government's, about the bill's decision to send $1,200 to everyone that makes under 75,000?
I mean, it's relief. I will say that I'm not sure it's the kind of relief that is going to be sustained from the perspective of what can $1,200, how long can $1,200 last, and whether there'll be more relief coming from the federal government to that effect. But also, when you look at a pandemic of this nature, not knowing how long it will last, not knowing how many months, and hopefully it's just months, that people will be unemployed, that $1,200 doesn't buy a lot. And so, I know that there's been a lot of debate about whether people are calling this stimulus or whether it's relief. This is just relief. I mean, there's, I think when we talk about stimulus, we've got to talk about how we get small businesses back on their feet, how we get workers back into their jobs, how we get the economy 100%, producing again.
Right. Well, what would you say the state should do as stimulus? And do you feel like stimulus is really a function of the federal government? And I have to say, as a small business owner, I think it's kind of, the script has been flipped, because the issues that affect us, like, we're so used to first going to our local folks when you have a problem, right? There's an issue, you call your local city council person, your alderman, whatever. And then if they can't help it, then maybe you go to your state folks. And then if it's really, really bad, or you really need to, bring up the ladder, you go to your federal folks. But I think when it comes to like real financial investment and stimulus, the state and local governments have been looking to the federal government and asking them to really do their job, right?
They have. And so, I think it's really the responsibility of everyone. Look, I think when you look at small businesses, and certainly the business community, they're unique to their communities. They bring unique vitality to different communities. And but for businesses during crisis. I think there is a role for the federal government to play. Obviously, states are being stretched, and so are local governments in terms of their finances. And so there is a place for the federal government to step in. I would also say that I hope banks and other financial institutions will play a bigger role in this. That hopefully understanding that part of what makes economies churn is just being sure that we've got businesses up and running, and so we're hoping that banks will step in as well. And I do need to say that Governor Newsom's been working with them. We were able to get a 90-day grace period on mortgages, and so all of this helps in terms of just individuals' bottom line. But when you think about the economy more generally, more can be done.
So what are ways that the state government can bring in additional resources in a short-term way to help people within the state? Are there mechanisms that you can use? Is there reserves somewhere? Are you considering taking short-term loans? I know that Andrew Cuomo was talking about that for New York.
Yeah,
Doing
right.
short-term loans to fill the budget gap. Are those things that we're considering, or are we thinking about just making major cuts? Like, what are we thinking about?
Well, I would say all of those things are on the table, Manny. I mean, when you think about how big California is, how much of the state budget is really directed towards, helping our most vulnerable, paying for critical services like education and transportation. You look at all of that, and we have a lot of needs in California. So I would say all of those measures are on the table. The analysis, as I said, is being done as we speak in terms of what our cash flow looks like. We've not had to do any borrowing since since I took office in January 2015. We just have this robust recovery. We led the national recovery, and so. But I would say all of those measures are on the table, and so at this point. We are going to do whatever we can and spend whatever we need to protect the health and safety of Californians. And if it means that we have to expend all of our reserves, we will do that. But also try to balance that with being able to fund critical public services as well.
Okay. I know that, so California is known for a lot of things, and I'm a very, 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 very proud Californian, born and raised in California, and I love our state. One of the things we are also known for is being the economic and innovation powerhouse of this country.
That's right.
And so my question is to you, what would you like to see large private companies do to step up to the plate and rise to the occasion to help our state out and our local governments and our small businesses?
Well, I think there's a lot they can do. First of all, I've been thinking a lot about what it means when you have an entire state isolating in their homes. And, in some ways, this is difficult for people. And I would hope that some of the large companies can be helpful in terms of how they help us continue to connect with one another. How we in ways that I still can't believe in parts of California we don't have reliable, affordable broadband so that people can communicate and so they can connect with others. So I would hope this is really kind of a wake-up call in terms of we need to step in to be sure that all of California is connected to each other. And then secondly, I would say as we think about the recovery, if there are ways that, large companies and I would say, they are also taking a bit of a hit as well, although they have much more ability to look at, how to help those who really are probably not going to be able to return to work in their respective industries. So where are the jobs of the future? And as we know in California, because we are a state of innovation, everything is about technology. Everything's about just technological innovation. And this is where we are going to see a divide when people are looking for work after this pandemic. So I would hope these large companies are also in the training business and looking at how I can get tools to those parts of the state that don't have them, to those people who've not had access to them.
Yeah. Is there, I read somewhere recently that there's an estimate that over 120,000 hotel jobs will be lost in this alone, because of course so many people come to our fabulous state and they stay in our hotels, and that those jobs have been lost. Is there an industry that you are particularly worried about not recovering quickly from this economic shutdown?
I would have to say there are a few. One is the restaurant industry. I think restaurants run on such thin margins, and obviously, and you know this better than most. And so, but what I am hopeful about, Manny, is that as we come out of this,
Yeah.
that things can't look the way that they looked before this pandemic.
Yeah.
We've got to be smarter and thinking about, what are new business models that really could be more sustaining for everyone,
Mhm.
where those who really have been the most vulnerable throughout this whole thing, workers and our service sectors and now who are unemployed, aren't the ones that continue to stay vulnerable
Yeah.
as we continue to rebuild this economy. And you have a model with Manny's that I think people need to look at.
Yeah.
How do we look at it as as an essential kind of community venue where it's not just about the what you get in terms of when people pay a tab, but that there is support for this as a place of community.
Last question. Are there other kind of things that you think we might grow, ways in which we might grow from this that will make us a more resilient state, both in terms of our finances and actually as a people in this state?
Certainly, I think as a people, I hope it's not lost on anyone that front and center, we have got to really take care of those who are really undergirding the bulk of our economy. When you think about everyone who has lost their job during this time,
Yeah.
how we are able to give them opportunities so that they are not as vulnerable during the next crisis that hits. I'm amazed that as I'm out walking and as I'm out and about, I'm over here in San Francisco, and the amount of cars that aren't on the road. And so, one of the biggest crises that we still are yet to face, have yet to face, is the climate crisis.
Yeah.
This tells me that we can do without our cars if we
Yeah.
put our minds to it. Now we're being compelled to do it here, but it also says to me, this is not going to be the last of our crises, and we have to hopefully take the lessons we learned here and really think about how we can be smarter.
All right, Betty, let's get to some of these audience questions.
Sure.
The first question I have comes from John. Are there ways California can make its tax base less volatile without simultaneously making it less progressive?
Yeah, no, great question. And this is really
Yeah.
it's what you talked about.
Yeah.
We're the state of innovation, and so there are ways, but any kind of tax reform in that respect, in a big way, whether it's looking at lots of proposals to tax commercial property differently, which
Yeah.
also has its effects downstream.
Yeah.
Looking at applying the sales tax to selected services, certainly brings in money, but that's very regressive. So I think it really is about, you have to peel. You've got to peel the layers all the way back if you want to do this, because at the end of the day, the tax system will only be as sustainable as the ability of the system to be fair in terms of who bears the burden. And so, right now we are counting on our upper income earners. 70% close to 70% of our general fund is from personal income taxes, and that's what we're counting on right now. So it is volatile. On the other hand, I think what comes out of this crisis will also be about, just how do we make it a little bit more stable so we can count on just having a little bit more stability.
One more tax question from Charlie is, how feasible or likely do you think it is that cities and counties raise their own property taxes to make up for lost sales and income taxes?
I think it's very, very difficult. It is, I think when you speak to local officials, the options aren't great. I think property taxes are if property taxes that could be raised, and then this was the case before Prop 13, that every county set their own rate based on what the needs were. I'm not sure that going back to that system is going to garner a lot of support. And I also think it's one aspect of the tax system. We have to look at every single aspect of the tax system, because at the end of the day, the mix of taxes really, really matters.
We do have a lot of questions, so I'm going to try to run through them pretty quickly.
Okay.
Joseph Copley wanted a clarification for the unemployment insurance benefits. It's an added 600 a week, not a cap of 600, right, Betty? I think
it's
it
an
is
additional.
Okay, that's what I thought. Shaz wants to know, given your knowledge of the economic impact of small businesses to California, how has this reality impacted this, and what will be needed to revamp them?
I'm sorry, say, I missed part of that.
Given how important small businesses are to the economic power of California, how has this current reality impacted them, which we've talked about already, but more
Yes.
specifically, what do you think will be needed to revamp them?
Oh goodness, a lot of assistance. I mean, this is where, as we go forward, I hope that we look at small businesses as being kind of less of the most vulnerable of the sectors of our economy that are hit. Small businesses support every other sector of our economy, and
Yeah.
so we should be supporting them because it really brings success to so many other sectors of our economy. And I look at, I mean, I'll just give you an example. I look at the climate crisis and all of the climate technology that we're developing. It's not going to be the companies who are developing the technology that gets it out to you or me. It's going to be the small businesses, and
Yeah.
so we have to bring them in earlier. We have to support them earlier. We've got to be sure that they're sustained. But more importantly, I would hope that people understand the role of them as far as really fueling other sectors of the economy.
Got it. David Capelli has a question about rent relief. What about it? California is very rent burdened. Do we have a lot more renters than other states? I imagine we probably do. And
That's a good question. I'm not sure about. We do have a lot of renters, and I would say probably because of the high cost of housing.
yeah,
So in
yeah,
terms of home
definitely why
ownership.
I'm a renter.
Yes, exactly. This was one of the areas that really got, I would say, a lot of attention. And I think coming out of this crisis, the focus on housing will be a sustained focus because people are obviously being asked to isolate in their homes. And the question is, how long can they stay in their homes? And so rent is, there is a, there are a lot of moratoria that's been declared and statewide and locally, but those are stopgap measures. We have to do better with respect to housing affordability, but at the end of the day, it's about increasing supply. And of
Right.
course, in California, it's very expensive to build.
Okay, David, there's just so many questions for you, Betty. David Perper wants to know, while we don't know the length of this current health crisis and its financial impact on the state, I'm wondering what you think about the possibility that that the current bond measures being considered by the legislature, such as the climate change bond, will be able to move forward to being placed on the November ballot.
Yeah, I think really everything that's been proposed, the governor's proposed in his budget, is probably being reviewed right now by his finance department to
Mhm.
see what can actually go forward. This is the work that both his administration and my office is doing in terms of just looking at, I being able to pay the bills and his administration in terms of how we look at putting a budget together that is still going to meet our most critical need. And right now, that is the pandemic.
Mhm. Parker wants to know if you think it's more difficult to reform taxes in a recession or in a time of economic growth. It's interesting.
That's a great question. I think the conversation actually is more fruitful when we are in our downturn,
Mhm.
uh, and and to have those conversations, to see the realities of the brokenness of the current system,
Mhm.
and hopefully to really come to a point of where there's a consensus about how we need to reform it and actually enact it when times are robust again. Yeah.
Just on that same point, so much work was done in California after the 2008, 2009 recession to address vulnerabilities in our state's finances, I hope, I think.
Some, yes, no, building huge reserves. That was a
Yeah.
huge, yeah.
Well, maybe I'm thinking about like our banks and like not doing dangerous lending, but my question was going to be, do you feel like we're not in a recession, but we are in a slowdown, right? Or shutdown right now. Do you feel like some of the work that's been done over the last 10 years is the fruits are coming to bear right now?
Absolutely. I mean, I think and I'll just speak on the public side, and the banks. I think, I mean, I think the focus on the lending practices actually has really made a difference. What I would say on the state side is this: voters had a big part of this to put a rainy day fund in place that is going to be that was slated to be about $16.5 billion at the end of this fiscal year. That is what's needed,
Yeah.
during this time.
So you do.
We had significant budget reserves. We've had a reserve set aside for public education, for our safety net programs. And so when times are good, this is the discipline we need to exercise, and the legislature and the governor have done it.
Right.
So we actually started out from a point of strength. And it's not to say that, and because our needs are always greater and things are more costly here, I would say that there will be a huge draw on our reserves. And so we will begin to look and see just what the timing of all that is. We will also look at what the timing of this federal relief will be. And then, of course, we are making purchases to be sure that we've got the supplies and equipment that our healthcare personnel needs. So all of that is in the mix, but I would say that the discipline that we had was just really balancing our budgets on time and stocking away reserves for a rainy day. And I will say we're here.
I'm glad. Just a couple more questions. Shaz and actually a few people were asking about money that comes to California from tourism.
Yes.
And would you say that the effects on that are going to be short-term or long-term? Do you feel like people are, do you think this is a short-term blow, or could this have very long-term ramifications on our tourism?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I was thinking about that today as I was out picking up some health supplies. It is, this is a global pandemic, and so I think a lot of it really has to do with, just what the attitudes of people are around the world about, traveling to different places, and I would hope that California is still attractive for a lot of people, and I am going to hold out hope for that, because even in some of the worst of economic times, we have seen that that particular sector of the economy has bounced back every single time.
Okay, Moy Garcia has a question about unemployment benefits. They haven't changed since 2005, and max benefits really don't cover much in California. If the federal government hadn't stepped in, what would California have done, and what can we do in the future to make unemployment benefits actually do what they need to do?
So this is a tough one, because this is the benefits are paid through by employers, and so it is a rate that is set with employers, and of course now many employers are not doing well, and so I think we're very grateful for the federal government stepping in here, but this has been really kind of a long time issue that's been building in terms of how we really can put the fund in a place where the benefits could be higher. Obviously, the costs in California are higher. We want to be able to provide more, but and it is not meant to be income replacement, but it certainly could be a lot more than what we're paying. I agree. Yeah.
Okay, I just have two more for you, Betty. This is rapid fire. This is like what's that? It's like a
lightning round.
It's like a lightning round, except they're really complicated. TJ Fisher wants. It's like a really hard lightning round. I'd like to ask for your perspective on cooperation between Sacramento and individual jurisdictions during this crisis. It seems to me that there's a lot of cooperation right now, but I wonder, as our needs might diverge, and I'll just in ellipsis also put, and depending on how long this lasts, how we are all going to stay on the same page, taxation, relief, otherwise. Thank you so much.
Sure. There is a great deal of cooperation, and it's essential, during times like this. I would say that I think Governor Newsom's done really an outstanding job recognizing local unique situations, and so has been very much in touch with the major, a lot of localities around the state, but certainly with the major mayors around the state. And but the thing I will say is this. I think this really is the time for everyone to rise and to work together. And while we're on this subject, I just want to be sure that people are aware that the state and Governor Newsom has put up really a one-stop shop in terms of information around COVID-19. It's covid19.ca.gov. It's got the latest of what California is doing in terms of providing relief. All the information we're talking about is on that website as well. And then I will also say, I'll do the plug at the end because there's a hopeful note to all of this too.
Well, that's going to be my last question. So Nicole Durst wants to know, what do you hope happens in California as a result of this crisis? And maybe that can be your opportunity to end on a high note.
Absolutely. No, thank you, Manny. Thanks, Nicole. So on covid19.ca.gov, there is a part that I particularly enjoy telling people about, and it's ways that each of us can help. We're each in crisis, but there's also this notion that when we're in crisis, there's an opportunity to always, pull together and do more for each other. And so there are ways to volunteer. I would hope that what comes out of this is just a better way, a better consciousness about how we're connecting with one another. It is as much as we are asked to be isolated from one another. I hope that the extra steps that we are taking to connect with one another, and those are things that we can do for many elderly people who even can't have visitors now, and would love to be connected by phone. We have many nonprofits that are trying to connect volunteers with them, delivering meals, not actually handing them over, but to volunteer with Meals on Wheels to get meals to people. So so I would hope that in some ways, our connection with one another is much more profound, and that it really becomes much more ingrained as a value that we hold as Californians.
Yeah. Well, please, our operator, if you don't mind putting into the chat box. Yes. So there've been, by the way, thank you. Elisa asked if this conversation is going to be recorded and put on YouTube, and it will, so you can distribute it that way. We'll send it to folks. Betty Yee is the California State Controller, and aren't we lucky to have you as our State Controller? Seriously, you're doing such a great job, and we're so proud of you. Please, those who've tuned in, there's a link in the chat box. It's joinit.org/o/Manny's. Please help my small business make it through this time by clicking on that link and becoming a sponsor of Manny's. It's $36 a month. That's what it starts at. And then we can really use the help right now to help us through this time. You can tag us at Welcome to Manny's if you enjoyed this conversation. And Betty, if folks want to follow your updates, I know you're very active on Twitter, right?
Twitter and Facebook, yes.
Yeah.
Sure.
What's your Twitter handle? It's just Betty.
Betty for California. Betty for CA.
Betty for CA. And I'm sure our amazing operator, Sam, is going to put that in there. She is Betty for CA. That's in the chat box. Follow me on Twitter.
California Controller, too.
And California Controller. Yes. Thank you so much again, Betty Yee. Thank you to Sam, Ram, and Jupiter for putting on these events and being part of the Manny's team and being such stalwarts. And thank you, all of you. We had over almost 100 people tune into this conversation, which I'm really proud of. Folks are tuning in and listening. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a wonderful evening. And thank you, Betty, most of all.
Thank you, Manny.
And please, my well wishes and my health to your mother, who's 96 years old. I send her my love and my prayer, and I hope that she stays, and I pray that she stays healthy.
Then be well. You stay well. Thank you, Manny.
Bye, Betty.